Welcome to How to Be a Humane Leader Without Losing Your Job. In this podcast, we dive into compassionate leadership in today's fast-paced business environment. With our experience and insights, we'll help you lead with heart while securing your career. Join us for engaging conversations and practical advice to elevate your leadership skills and make a real difference. I'm your host, Chris Hullerking, a Fortune 100 IT leader, alongside Roberto Torres, a seasoned startup engineering leader. Today, we're discussing what to do if you've discovered that your boss has committed fraud. What do you do as a humane leader, and how does it impact company culture? This is going to be a hot topic. Hey, Roberto, how you doing today? Didn't commit any fraud, did you?
No, no, I haven't. I'm doing great. Thank you very much. And indeed, this is a hot topic, which is going to provide great discussions with us.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's one of those things where, there's outright fraud, right? Where maybe they've been convicted already, and that's a little bit different. I think we ought to probably start with something a little bit early in the process where perhaps you suspect someone in the company or your boss has committed fraud. Maybe it's not proven yet. So I don't have a lot of experience in the space. I got some things that I'll mention along procurement where things were, shall we say, shady, maybe not illegal. But have you experienced actual legal, crime fraud?
Yes, I had. I used to work at a fintech company a few years ago, and this company had a pretty tight and strict ethics code, and say constantly to us, if you find out someone at the company is doing fraud, please follow this process. Well, what I could tell you was that our country manager here in Mexico committed fraud. And I discovered because I was in charge of the operations. But at that time, I had to approve all the invoices regarding everything, regarding our operation, regarding our Mexican office and everything. And the problem with that was that I did it again. I was doing my monthly process. The problem was that I found out that an invoice was on behalf of the wife of this country manager.
Wow.
And when I dive into that, I discovered that it was like, I think it was like $10,000, $12,000 of the renovation of the office directly to this lady, which it didn't cover out. So the thing was that I was at an impasse. What should I do? He's my boss. She is his wife. And what should I do? And I remember that obviously that we had this ethics code. So I followed the process and I sent all the information to Germany, which was this 50 base. But the problem was, what should I do? Should I approach my boss and say, hey, I discovered this? Should I not? Should I be so secretive? And the thing about this is that when you discover, I think that when you discover this, there are two cultures in which they could clash or they could merge. And one, it is the culture of the company, and the second one, it is your culture of what you should do and what you shouldn't. So it was a pretty big discovery, and it happened.
And how did you feel about that? I mean, were you worried, or was it so clear that it had happened? In other words, were you first just suspicious, like this couldn't have really happened, and I don't want to falsely accuse somebody? Because being a humane leader, anytime you're confronting somebody, you want to ensure that you're really, really sure you're, let's say, being humane, right? Here in our country, right, you're innocent until proven guilty. but you really don't want to accuse people either unless you're really pretty sure they're guilty. How did you feel about it?
Well, first let me tell you that here in Mexico is the opposite. Here you're guilty until proven innocent, and by law.
Wow.
It is different, maybe by mine, but I felt first of all shocked, bad, and the thing is one of the laws or one of the statements in the company was that you cannot provide business to a family member of yours because it is nepotism, and
Yes.
it was totally mentioned. And I felt that this guy was really good, and he was having all this rapport with me and Canada. We have a strong bond because I was at operations, and he was the country manager. So rather than maybe touching my heart and say I won't do this, what I did was to follow strictly all the process and everything. And the first thing that I did was to search the HR manager. She was at Germany at that time, and I told her I require a meeting with you. I explained her everything, and she told me, okay, what you require to do is gather all the information and send it to you. Your work email, so it would be how do you say it?
Record, an electronic record.
Yeah, like a log of what everything is going on. And you can send it, and then when you have it, everything, you will send an email to ethics at, I don't know what was the email. But first, I felt, for me, I felt like I was betrayed, because this kind of stuff shouldn't be happening, but it happened. So I felt like I was maybe running and I hit a wall, and this kind of stuff, and I thought, what should I do? I'm a really logic and structured guy, so I always follow the rules, regardless of the company, if it's personal, if between parentheses, if there is a grass that says don't walk into that, I won't do it.
Yep.
That's what I do. So it was like shocking to discover this.
Yeah, and I think that's a part of leadership, whether it's humane leadership or inhumane leadership. A lot of people don't realize in leadership that you get put in positions where you have to make some pretty difficult decisions, decisions that can affect your coworker friends. This kind of situation where you have a good rapport with someone, you consider them a work friend, maybe even a friend who had been to your home. You never know, right? That depend different work relationships. That there's different levels of closeness there. But as a humane leader, you sometimes get put into situations where your loyalties are tested. And my kind of rule of thumb for that is exactly the same as yours. If there's rules about something and things around fraud and using nepotism, using your spouse, they're usually crystal clear in small companies and big companies. So as a humane leader, I think you did the right thing, right? You followed the letter of the rules. The rules say to do step 1, step 2, step 3. That's what you did. You consulted with HR to make sure your understanding of the rules was correct, which it was, and you unfortunately have to do some things that on the friendship side of the work relationship don't feel very good. But as a leader, that's part of leadership. Sometimes you got to do some things that are uncomfortable. They're not wrong, they're uncomfortable. And it
Yeah.
puts you in that challenging situation. And to be that humane leader, sometimes you got to just follow the rules to the letter of the law and let the evidence that you gather make the final decision. Maybe, right? Let's just pretend they gather the evidence and they look at it and, oh, that lady just happens to be the same name, but look, her identification number is different than his wife's because we have it here in HR system or something. And so we could tell it's just a coincidence that it's the same name. That wasn't your situation, but at least then you've gathered evidence, you did the things that were right. The relationship with your boss, if you had accused him, right, but it was my second situation where the wife really wasn't involved in the remodeling, and so it was not a bad thing. If he's really a good boss and understands that you're following the rules, it should not impact that relationship at all. Now, if he's guilty, he's going to get fired, and if he was a friend at home, then he's probably not going to be much of a friend anymore, unfortunately. But you probably don't need people like that in your life.
Yeah, and indeed, and you mentioned something that is the foundation of this. Even though if it's something that it is uncomfortable for you, or it will provide you maybe problems with another people, you must do it because you're abiding the rules as something. It is humane and leader doesn't clash over here. It has to work like that because I discover my boss, but maybe you discover a peer or one of your reports, or I don't know, maybe a customer or something. I don't know, something like that. The thing is, you must do it. And it could be maybe a little stuff, or it could be a big problem, but in the end, if the company discovers that you knew and you didn't find out, excuse me, and you didn't say something about it, the problem is going to be even bigger for you. So you must act. That's why in this case, what we have spoken too many times, it is obviously something true. It is communication. You find out about this. You follow the rules. You must communicate. If you find out, you read the rules but don't communicate, the one that is acting badly, it is you.
Yes, no, I completely agree. A lot of the topics we talk about boil down to that communication stuff, and being a leader is about communicating and following through. And I'll tell you, I do apply kind of a rule to a lot of this ethics and being a humane leader. Is everything that I've ever had to do as a leader, ultimately I got to resolve it with myself so that I can sleep at night. That's kind of my rule of thumb. Is my moral compass internally to be a humane leader? Yes, it is. Okay, so what I'm being presented with, can I do this and feel I'm being a humane leader so I sleep soundly at night? I can put my head down and feel I did the right thing. And I'll tell you what, if I covered up that guy's fraud, or I didn't investigate it further when it seemed questionable, maybe it's the early stage and I'm like, this doesn't seem right. If I had just taken that and just pushed it aside and didn't look into it, it would start to bother me at night. I would start to think about it. It would interrupt my sleep because I would feel I wasn't doing the right thing, and you have to have that moral compass. I wish more people as leaders had that moral compass that they were doing the right thing, because not everybody is a humane leader.
Yeah, let me give you an example of something that happened. I think it was maybe 4 or 5 years ago here in Mexico. There was a startup called Yogome. That's Yogome, Yogome. And these guys, what they did was educational games for kids. So they raised up a lot of money. I don't know how many dollars, millions of dollars they raised, but that was like that. I'm bringing this up because during the whole year, they reported to the VCs, to the investors, that the numbers were amazing. But one of the VCs guys at one of the December parties, closing the year, discovered by one of the Yogome's employees, which was drunk, that the numbers weren't right. They say they have, I don't know, 1.2 million customers, but they actually had 300,000. So the problem was that they were committing fraud, and many employees within Yogome knew about this, but instead of saying, okay, we have this relationship with our investors, I should tell them, I should, I don't know, drop an email, maybe a conversation, I don't know, something like that. They didn't. And the thing was, they didn't do it because they thought, some of them later on, when they were interviewed, say, I wouldn't do it because it was my job. If I did that, the company will have closed. That it happened. I think 2 months after that, the company closed. Many people were fired because they committed fraud. So I think that was one of the problems, or that is one of the problems with people when they find out of someone doing a fraud, because they might say, hey, I have this job, I cannot do it. But the thing is, you must always do the right stuff, because
Yeah,
it's
yes.
not, if not, it's going to be backfire to you. You always have to do it, because if not, you're a plain negative guy instead of a good guy.
Right. And you never know how big that fraud could balloon and affect other people not in the company, right? I think back to the Enron days and the WorldCom frauds and things like that. And if you realize, if someone had alerted authorities to the frauds that were taking place, think about how many people's pension plans or retirement plans or personal savings would not have been affected if they would have caught that fraud earlier. In this instance, it was a smaller firm, so it couldn't impact some people, but you don't know. Some nice little old lady could have invested $100,000 of her retirement fund into this company to try and win big, because she didn't have much. So she made the big bet on one company and she lost it all because of this fraud. You really, it's uncomfortable to be a leader sometimes. It just is. But you got to have the moral compass to do the right thing. If you want to be a leader, if you really want to be a leader and lead things forward in your company, sometimes you got to do things that are not very comfortable.
Yeah, and one thing that is the problem nowadays. One thing is about Yogami, but we could talk about all these founders of startups who have lied to the investors, mentioning, "Hey, I had, I don't know, 10 million customers," when they have, I think maybe 100,000. I don't remember the names right now, but some of them in the States have gone to jail. um, and the thing is, don't take away the humane into your leader. They're like a friend, or they're like maybe they're like a couple in which they could fight at some time, but they will go further rather than going alone. And what I meant by this is, always be a leader and be humane. Where if you decide to go just as a leader and leave behind the humane aspect, you will do decisions that will be bad for you and the project that you're in, because it will backfire, you know. And what I have seen lately in this startups environment is that people decide what to do, their actions based on money. Hey, if I'm a humane leader, I might not, receive this amount of money. Maybe I won't receive this millions of dollars. The business won't thrive. So I will do whatever is required as a leader, but I will take away the humane. And that is something that some people will fight uh, against being a humane leader, but some people will do what is good, what is best, what is correct, and maybe they will thrive on a longer term rather than the small one.
Yeah, I worked at my firm for a very long time, decades and decades. So I have a unique perspective in that you can see some leaders who are totally focused on leadership, but are being inhumane. And they may succeed for a while and they may get promoted faster than you and so on. But I'll tell you, most of the time, ultimately, they end up losing. and
Yeah,
and I and I and I think in general they lose on fronts that they didn't expect. Maybe yes, they went on to some bigger job, but they ended up divorced, or their kids don't talk to them anymore. You may pay a bigger price than you realize. Now, if you choose to just go for the money and be a hardcore leader and the heck with humanity, and I'm just going to pound on the numbers and I don't care who I run over, hey, it's you get one trip on the planet, do what you want. I'm not going to waste my time trying to convince somebody to be a humane leader who absolutely doesn't want to. But I think, my observation is in the long run, even though you may have some setbacks by being a humane leader compared to the hard driving type A, pound the table swearing kind of person, I think you'll be much happier overall in life and in your work relationships being a humane leader. And ultimately, you will be more successful on more vector points of measuring your success as a leader.
yeah, indeed. And using those words, maybe we should talk about this on a later podcast. It is how to be coherent, a coherent leader at your at the company, at work, I mean your life and your personal life, because you had to be. Otherwise, you cannot be someone at work and someone different at personal life. It's
Yes.
kind of
Yeah. Yeah. That's very hard. That's very hard. I did want to mention one thing too. While I didn't have the kind of direct experience with fraud that you had, in working for big companies, we actually had toll-free fraud reporting numbers. They had an email box so that you could like set up a disposable Gmail or Yahoo account and send the fraud to. So those of us, who didn't have direct experience with it, you should be aware of the rules in your company and the methods for that because my experience in some of our procurement things, while there was never direct fraud, there certainly were some things that would sometimes be shady, where, hey, did you hear that company, one of their VPs is the brother-in-law of this vice president in our company, and that kind of thing. And so, that would get out. You would maybe share that in the procurement process to make sure that it's investigated. Maybe that company that's the brother-in-law of the wife of the husband, of the vice president, maybe they are the best company at it, but you need to be above board on it. And everybody needs to be aware of that bias, that there could be some uh, not fraud, but maybe conflict of interest, right? Being a humane leader can also be things that are not necessarily illegal, but maybe would be questionable. And being a humane leader means everything should be upfront. So, hey, there's 5 companies bidding on this contract and procurement, but it turns out one of the senior vice presidents of that company is the sister-in-law of one of our senior vice presidents. So we need to be open and honest about that. That relationship exists. Doesn't mean you can't use the company, but everybody who's involved in the procurement process then needs to know. And depending on how that surfaces, it could look good or could look bad, right? But if you're the only one that has that knowledge that exists, you again back to that being a humane leader and making tough decisions as a leader, you need to report it. Doesn't mean you need to put your name to it like you did with the fraud with HR, but in like a big company, there's actually anonymous ways that you can report things for investigation. Doesn't mean somebody's going to get fired. In some cases, it's just, oh, this relationship exists. We're going to let everybody know on the procurement team and on the IT team and on the finance team that's going to weigh in on the contract. They need to be aware that this relationship between the vendor and our company exists so that we can approach it in a fair and equitable way. And sometimes that means that, let's say that the brother-in-law or whoever works in our company cannot be involved in the decision until the final decision is done. And maybe there can be no reporting of people, right? So the person on the procurement team can't be a direct report to the report of the person who's got the relationship with the company, right? Because then they could affect their pay raise or get them fired or et cetera. But really, gets back to that whole thing is if you're honest and you're a humane leader, you make sure that everything you're doing and everything your teams do is ethical and that you can sleep at night with a clean conscience that you did the right thing.
Yeah, and looking this problem or this situation right now, yeah, the problem was that rather than being anonymous, the process was you had to send an email to HR. So maybe people would have said if they discover fraud, no, I don't want someone to know that I did this because my job is at stake. Maybe that was one of the problems within this process. But in the end, honesty is as important as communication. If we are being honest, we are being honest with ourselves.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Maybe with this, even though this topic is so broad, maybe we can discuss this further. Which do I wrap up? Then you agree?
Absolutely. It's a touchy topic, and I hope that in the rest of your career you don't have to deal with any fraud. So I hope it goes that way. So thanks for joining us for another episode of How to Be a Humane Leader Without Losing Your Job. We hope our insights help you become a smarter and more strategic leader. Apply today's lessons to see the positive impact on your team and career. Catch all our episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Anchor, and here on YouTube. Join us next week as we discuss something trendy in the leadership world. Until then, stay humane, stay successful. Roberto, I'll talk to you again soon.
Bye-bye.